the offer of humanitarian visa in Australia and instead return to her war-torn home country. It comes amid concerns that actors for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard have been able to reach and threaten members of the national team while they've been here. Chris Campy joins me now with the latest. Chris, 5 of the 7 women who initially sought to defect have now changed their minds.
Yeah, Georgie, whether these women have actually changed their minds or simply felt that they had no other choice, they have indeed chosen to leave Australia and in doing so rejected that offer of a visa to make a life here on humanitarian grounds. Now, the team's captain, Zahra Ganbari, she is headed to KL in Malaysia to join the rest of her teammates who are on their way home when they can get there. Of course, 7 members of that team were provided the opportunity to stay. And last night, the Home Affairs Department, Tony Burke's office, they announced that another had reneged on that offer. Now just 2 remain here in Australia. One of those who did apply, Zara Meshkakha, has been accused of being a mole, a go-between of sorts, carrying threats from the regime to the players, not just against the team themselves, but also their families back home. Now that leads, of course, to the suspicion that these decisions have been influenced under duress or under pressure. Now, Iranian news agency Tasnim, which displays an obvious support for the regime, was quick to jump on the apparent about-face. One article claimed that players had withdrawn their request in Australia and are en route back to what they described as their beloved homeland, going on to say that this had thwarted the sinister schemes of enemies targeting the team and what they call the distortion by media outlets. Now, the article went on to accuse the Australian government of playing a subservient and shameful role in Trump's scheme to inflict a major defeat on the Iranian nation. Now, of course, it was the choice not to sing the national anthem during the Women's Asian Cup that presented what could be deemed an immediate threat to the team should they be punished for such a public display of defiance. But regardless, the reasoning for these women to reject that offer to stay, the Australian government concedes they unfortunately can only abide by those wishes.
We offered them the choice if they wanted to stay here in Australia. We offered them humanitarian visas, but ultimately it is their choice.
Do you think their families would have been threatened?
Oh, absolutely. I've got no doubt that the government would have applied a lot of pressure on the families and on the players as well here through intermediaries.
Now, of course, the government and indeed Tony Burke have been quite public throughout this entire process. The Home Affairs Minister was at the airport face-to-face with those choosing to defect and posting a number of photos during those meetings. There has been some criticism on that level of publicity, and whether it's helped or hindered this process, that's still very much unclear. Of course, it's unlikely any members of the national side can only monitor and hope for the safety of these women on their eventual return to their homeland, which is a country still very much at war. Georgie?
A lot of developments there. Thank you very much, Chris Campy, for taking us through it. Something we've been asked or we're contributing to. It follows the US President's public plea to allies for support to secure the key shipping route as he sends thousands of troops to the region. CBS correspondent Charlie DeGato reports from Tel Aviv.
In the early hours, air raid sirens rang out across Tel Aviv, a familiar sound but with a frequency and intensity we haven't seen for days, with multiple waves aimed across Israel. Some getting through one of the most advanced air defenses in the world. Despite 2 weeks of relentless airstrikes, Iran has withstood the might of US and Israeli firepower. Speaking on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, Iran's foreign minister dismissed President Trump's statement that Iran wants a ceasefire deal.
No, we never asked for a ceasefire, and we have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes.
The front line of that fight right now, the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic but narrow waterway off the coast of Iran through which 20% of the world's oil and gas is shipped. The presence of 2 U.S. aircraft carriers, a dozen or more destroyers, and hundreds of combat aircraft have failed to break Iran's chokehold on that key transit route. Even after punishing U.S. airstrikes on military assets on Karg Island, an economic lifeline that manages roughly 90% of Iran's crude exports. And now, the deployment of thousands more U.S. troops, including roughly 2,200 Marines, specifically trained and equipped for the kind of fighting on sea and land that can't be done from 30,000 feet.